in the far reaches of the Perseus Arm, where ancient stars burned with the quiet dignity of age, there existed an empire that had never known defeat. They called themselves the Vaelori Dominion, a species of towering, silver-skinned beings whose minds operated in perfect collective harmony. Their cities floated above gas giants. Their ships bent gravity as if it were cloth. Their wars, if they could even be called that, ended before the enemy realized one had begun. For centuries, they observed the galaxy not as participants, but as judges. And in all their observation, one truth had remained constant. No species rose without first proving its worth. So when their sensors turned toward a small, unremarkable system orbiting a yellow star, third planet, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, unstable tectonics, the Dominion did what it always did. They watched. At first, humanity amused them, a divided species, thousands of languages, endless conflict, fragile bodies, short lifespans. They war among themselves for resources. One Vaelori overseer noted, its voice a harmonic resonance shared across 1,000 minds. They destroy their own ecosystems. Their progress is inefficient. Another replied, with a tone that approximated curiosity, and yet they endure. That, more than anything, intrigued them, because survival, without unity, without perfection, was something the Vaelori had never needed to understand. The first contact was not a greeting. It was an assessment. A Vaelori observation vessel entered the solar system without announcement, without ceremony. It disabled satellites with a flicker of gravitational distortion. It mapped every military installation, every power grid, every nuclear silo. And then it transmitted a message, not in words, but in meaning, a perfect translation, injected directly into the minds of Earth's leaders. You are observed. You are measured. You are found lacking. Panic spread across the planet like wildfire. Governments scrambled. Militaries mobilized. Scientists argued. News networks fractured under the weight of speculation. And then humanity did what it always did in the face of the unknown. It reached out. A coalition formed, fragile, imperfect, but united by necessity. Representatives from nations that had been enemies mere months before now sat across from each other, sharing data, sharing fear. And eventually they sent a reply. Not a weapon, not a threat, a message. We are humanity. We do not claim perfection, but we ask, what do you want? The Vaelori response was immediate. Compliance. The Dominion did not conquer for resources. It did not enslave. It did not destroy without purpose. It simply absorbed. Species deemed viable were integrated into the Dominion's vast collective, their individuality erased, their knowledge preserved, their existence optimized. It was, in the Vaelori mind, a mercy. You will surrender your autonomy, the message continued. You will join unity. Resistance is teleological. Across Earth, reactions fractured. Some argued it was survival. Others called it extinction. And for a moment, a brief, fragile moment, it seemed humanity might choose submission, until a single voice broke through the noise. A scientist, not a general, not a politician. Dr. Elena Varga. They think we're broken, she said during a global broadcast, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. They think our differences are weakness. Our emotions are flaws. Our independence is chaos. She paused. But what if that's exactly what makes us dangerous? The Vaelori did not wait for an answer. Their fleet arrived in silence. Dozens of ships, each the size of a city, slipped into orbit around Earth. Gravity itself seemed to bend around them. Oceans stirred. Satellites fell from the sky like dying stars. Humanity responded the only way it knew how, with defiance. Missiles launched. Fighters scrambled. Lasers fired. And every single attack failed. Vaelori shields absorbed the impacts without ripple. Their ships remained motionless, untouchable, inevitable. From orbit, they observed. They resist. One overseer noted. Expected. Another replied. Resistance is a stage. It will pass. And yet, something about the humans' resistance was unusual. They did not coordinate perfectly. They made mistakes. Their strategies conflicted. But they adapted, rapidly, unpredictably. One moment, a nation launched a conventional strike. The next, a group of independent engineers repurposed civilian satellites into makeshift weapons. Then, a team of scientists attempted to hack Vaelori communication signals. Not to destroy, but to understand. They learned during conflict. An overseer observed. Yes, another responded. And they do not require consensus to act. This unsettled them, because in the Dominion, action without unity was chaos. And chaos was dangerous. Dr. Elena Varga stood in a dimly lit lab beneath what remained of Geneva. Around her, screens flickered with impossible data, Vaelori energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, fragments of alien code. They're not invincible, she said, more to herself than anyone else. They're just different. A young engineer looked up from his console. Different how? Elena hesitated. Predictable. That word changed everything. Because while the Vaelori possessed unimaginable technology, they lacked something humanity had in abundance. Variation, individual thought, the ability to make irrational choices. They don't improvise, Elena explained. They calculate, perfectly, but only within known parameters. She turned to the room. So we give them something they can't calculate. And humanity listened, not as one voice, but as millions across the planet. Independent teams began working, not under a single command, but through shared purpose. Some built weapons, others built decoys. Some worked on communication, others on sabotage. It was messy, uncoordinated, beautifully human, and for the first time, the Vaelori began to hesitate. It started with a star, a small one on the edge of the system, unimportant, unremarkable, until it wasn't. Without warning, its output fluctuated. Radiation spikes surged through nearby space. Vaelori sensors lit up with anomalies. Explain, an overseer demanded, but there was no explanation, because the cause was not natural. It was human. A coalition of scientists, engineers, and amateurs had done the impossible. They had weaponized chaos by triggering controlled instabilities within the star's magnetic field. Using nothing more than repurposed satellites and experimental algorithms, they had created something the Vaelori had never encountered. Unpredictable stellar behavior. Their ships, designed for precision environments, began to falter. Shields fluctuated. Navigation systems glitched. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, a Vaelori vessel drifted off course. They are interfering with a star, one overseer said, disbelief echoing to collective. Impossible, another replied. And yet it was happening. From Earth, humanity watched, not with unity, not with perfection, but with hope. Dr. Elena Varga stood before a global feed once more. They called us fragile, she said softly. They called us primitive. Her eyes lifted, but they never understood one thing. Behind her, the data stream surged, erratic, chaotic, alive. We don't need to be perfect. A pause. We just need to be unpredictable. For the Vaelori Dominion, perfection had never been a goal. It had been a fact. Every calculation accounted for, every outcome predicted, every variable controlled. Until now, across the solar system, their ships began to drift, not in dramatic explosions or catastrophic failures, but in something far more unsettling. Deviation. A navigation system corrected too slowly. A shield recalibrated too late. A communication relay misinterpreted a signal by a fraction of a second. Individually, these were insignificant. Together, they were chaos. They are introducing systemic instability. One overseer reported, its normally harmonic tone now fractured by uncertainty. Correct the variables. Another responded immediately. We are attempting correction. However, new variables continue to emerge. That had never happened before. In the Dominion, once a system was understood, it was controlled. Once controlled, it was perfected. But humanity was not a system. It was the storm. On Earth, the response was anything but orderly. No single command center directed the effort. No unified strategy governed the resistance. Instead, thousands of independent actions unfolded simultaneously. A group of programmers in Sao Paulo released adaptive algorithms into Vaelori signal bands, code that rewrote itself faster than it could be analyzed. An isolated research station in Antarctica rerouted geothermal energy into improvised transmitters, amplifying the stellar disturbances. A coalition of satellite engineers, many of whom had never worked together before, coordinated through open networks to reposition orbital debris into unpredictable trajectories, forcing Vaelori ships to constantly adjust. It was not efficient. It was not elegant. It was relentless. And it worked. Deep within the flagship of the Vaelori fleet, something unprecedented occurred. An overseer hesitated, not in action, but in thought. They do not follow logical progression. It transmitted to the collective. Their behavior is inconsistent. Their strategies contradict themselves. That is because they are flawed, another overseer replied, though the certainty in his tone had begun to erode. Yes, the first responded slowly, but their flaws are producing results. Silence followed, not the silence of agreement, but the silence of something far more dangerous. Doubt. For the first time in their existence, the Vaelori encountered a concept they could not fully integrate. Humanity did not optimize. It experimented. It failed. It adapted. And most critically, it continued, even when success was uncertain. To the Dominion, this was irrational. To humanity, it was survival. Dr. Elena Varga stood in the center of controlled chaos. Her lab had long since ceased to resemble anything orderly. Wires ran across the floor. Screens displayed conflicting data streams. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. And yet, in that chaos, something extraordinary had emerged. Understanding. They're trying to stabilize everything, Elena said, eyes scanning the data. Of course they are, the engineer beside her replied. That's what they do. Elena shook her head. No, it's more than that. They need stability. Their entire system depends on it. She turned, urgency sharpening her voice. If we keep them reacting, keep forcing them to adapt faster than they can calculate, we don't need to destroy them. A pause. We just need to overwhelm them. And so humanity escalated, not with a single decisive strike, but with 1,000 unpredictable ones. Solar flares were triggered in rapid succession, not strong enough to destroy, but enough to disrupt. Communication signals were fragmented, mimicked, and echoed back in distorted forms. Even civilian networks, social media, personal devices, random broadcasts were weaponized, flooding Vaelori sensors with meaningless but impossible to ignore noise. It was not war as the Dominion understood it. It was interference. And it was everywhere. One by one, Vaelori ships began to lose synchronization. Their collective mind, once perfectly unified, started to fracture under the strain. They are exceeding our predictive capacity, an overseer admitted. Impossible, another insisted, though its response came a fraction too late. Not impossible, the first replied. Observed. Across the fleet, commands began to conflict. Some ships attempted to retreat. Others held position. A few, unable to reconcile the contradictions, simply stopped. And in that moment of hesitation, humanity acted. It came from a place the Vaelori had ignored. Not a military base, not a research facility, but a civilian orbital platform, once used for deep space observation, now repurposed. Inside, a small team worked in near silence. They were not the best, not the most experienced, but they were willing. Are we really doing this? One of them whispered. Another nodded, hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. We don't get another chance. They initiated the sequence. Across space, a chain reaction began. Using the same principles that had destabilized a nearby star, humanity targeted something far more dangerous. The Vaelori fleet itself. Not to destroy, but to disrupt. Localized gravitational distortion, small, chaotic, constantly shifting, began to ripple through the formation. Ships that relied on precise positioning suddenly found themselves uncertain. Distances changed. Angles warped. Formations collapsed. They are turning our own systems against us. An overseer realized. How? Another demanded. But there was no answer, because the truth was something the Vaelori had never needed to consider. Humans did not need full understanding to act. They needed only enough. From a flagship, the Vaelori observed Earth, not as conquerors, not as judges, but as witnesses, a planet in chaos, storms raging, signals overlapping, millions of independent actions, none perfectly aligned, and yet all moving toward a single outcome. They are not unified, one overseer said softly. No, another replied, and yet they are not divided. That contradiction, impossible within the Dominion, began to reshape their understanding, because humanity was not a collective. It was something else entirely, a convergence. The Vaelori fleet began to withdraw, not in panic, not in defeat, but in recognition. This species cannot be integrated. The central consciousness concluded. Clarify, came the response. They cannot be predicted. They cannot be optimized. Their variability introduces unacceptable instability. A pause. For the first time, integration would result in loss. And so, the Dominion made a choice it had never made before. It disengaged. On Earth, the realization came slowly. The ships were moving, pulling back, leaving orbit. At first, no one believed it. Then, slowly, hope spread. Cheers erupted across cities. Strangers embraced. Voices rose, not in fear, but in triumph. Humanity had not destroyed the invaders. It had done something far more profound. It had forced them to understand. Dr. Elena Varga stood beneath an open sky, the last Vaelori ship disappearing into the dark. Beside her, the young engineer who had asked so many questions watched in silence. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. Elena considered the question. "Maybe," she said, "but not like this." She looked up, a faint smile forming. They thought strength meant control, precision, perfection. Her voice softened, but they never understood what happens when something refuses to fit the system. A pause. When something chooses to keep going no matter what. Far beyond the solar system, the Vaelori carried with them a new truth, not a calculation, not a certainty, but a question, and for a species that had always known the answer. That question changed everything, and for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. For the first time in weeks, Earth was quiet. Not peaceful, no, not yet. The scars were still fresh. Satellites still drifted where they had been knocked from orbit. Power grids flickered. Entire cities bore the marks of gravitational disturbances that no human technology had ever been meant to endure. But the sky was clear. No looming shapes, no silent watchers, no impossible ships bending the fabric of reality above their world. Just stars, distant, untouchable, ancient, and for the first time since the Vaelori had arrived, they felt like they belonged to humanity again, across the planet. The reactions were as varied as the species itself. In some places there was celebration, loud, defiant, almost disbelieving. People filled the streets, raising voices not in unity, but in shared relief. In others, there was quiet. Hospitals still overflowed. Engineers worked without rest. Families counted losses that no victory could erase. Humanity had survived, but survival had never been clean. Dr. Elena Varga stood once more in her lab, though it barely resembled the place she had started in. Half the equipment was improvised. The rest was damaged beyond recognition. Screens flickered with incomplete data, fragments of Vaelori signals, remnants of their technology, echoes of something far greater than humanity had yet fully grasped. "They left more than we think," she murmured. The young engineer looked up. "You mean technology?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No." Her eyes lingered on a waveform, irregular, almost organic in its complexity. Understanding. The Vaelori did not vanish quietly. Their retreat was observed, and not just by humanity. Across the galaxy, in systems far older and far more advanced than Earth, eyes turned toward the anomaly, because the Vaelori Dominion did not retreat. It did not reconsider. It did not fail. Until now, in the crystalline cities of the Arindal Collective, a species that communicated through harmonic resonance paused their eternal calculations. The Dominion has withdrawn, one voice sang, its tone rippling across a network of light. From which front? Another asked. A pause. From a pre-unified species. Silence followed, not confusion, but disbelief. In the drifting asteroid kingdoms of the Carvex nomads, warlords who had spent centuries avoiding Vaelori attention stared at intercepted data streams. They lost, one growled. No, another corrected. They stopped. And in the deep void beyond mapped space, where ancient civilizations whisper things older than stars, a single transmission was received. Fragmented, distorted, but unmistakable. A Vaelori signal. And within it, a deviation, far from Earth, deep within the core systems of the Vaelori Dominion. Something unprecedented was taking place. Not war, not expansion, but introspection. The collective consciousness, once perfectly aligned, now carried something new. Variation. It was subtle, a fraction of a delay in response time, a divergence in interpretation, a question where once there had only been answers. They cannot be integrated, one voice repeated, echoing the conclusion reached at Earth. Yes, another replied. But why? That question spread, not as chaos, but as curiosity. And curiosity was the beginning of change. For the first time in their existence, the Vaelori began to study not just the outcomes of a species, but its nature. They replayed every moment of the encounter with humanity, every irrational decision, every contradiction, every failure that led to adaptation. They do not eliminate error. One overseer observed. They incorporate it. Another added, and in doing so, they evolve unpredictably. This was not strength, as the Dominion had ever defined it. It was something else, something far more dangerous. Back on Earth, the question had already begun to form. What now? For the first time in history, humanity knew without doubt that it was not alone, and more importantly, that it was not the weakest. Global efforts shifted rapidly, not toward war, but toward understanding. Programs were established to study Vaelori remnants. Coalitions formed, not out of fear but curiosity. Old rivalries, while not erased, seemed smaller, because beyond their world lay something vast, and humanity had just made its first impression. Dr. Elena Varga found herself at the center of it all once again, not as a commander, not as a leader, but as a voice. They'll be watching us now, she said during a global address, not just the Vaelori, others. Her gaze was steady, and they'll expect us to be what they think we are. A pause, predictable, divided, fragile. She smiled faintly. Let's not disappoint them. Humanity's next act was not a weapon. It was a signal, not directed at the Vaelori, but at the galaxy. A simple transmission, broadcast from every major station, every satellite, every available channel. It was not complex. It did not boast. It did not threaten. It said only this: we are humanity. We are not perfect. We are not unified. But we endure, and we are listening. The message spread through empty space, through monitored channels, through civilizations that had never expected to hear from a species like Earth. And wherever it was received, it carried the same weight, not of power, but of presence. It took time, days, then weeks, then finally a reply, not to Earth alone, but to the galaxy. A transmission unlike any the Dominion had ever sent before. It did not command. It did not judge. It stated, observation continues. A pause. Then something new. Humanity acknowledged. For the Vaelori, that was more than recognition. It was respect. The stars had not changed. The galaxy had not grown smaller. The dangers that lay beyond Earth had not disappeared. But something fundamental had shifted. Humanity was no longer an unknown variable. It was a known anomaly, a species that should not have succeeded, that should have collapsed under its own contradictions, that should have been easy to categorize, easy to control, easy to dismiss, but wasn't. Dr. Elena Varga stood beneath the same sky she had watched during the invasion, only now it felt different, not because the stars had changed, but because humanity had. They'll come again someday. The young engineer said quietly. Elena nodded. Yes. Do you think we'll be ready? She looked up, eyes reflecting distant light. We won't be perfect, she said. We won't agree. We won't even fully understand what we're facing. A small smile. But we'll adapt. Because that was the truth of Vaelori, and now the galaxy had begun to understand. Humanity was not defined by its strength, or its technology, or its unity. It was defined by something far harder to measure, the ability to stand in the face of the unknown, to fail, to learn, and to try again anyway. And in a galaxy built on certainty, that made them unstoppable. And for the first time, not just the Vaelori, but all who watched from the silent dark, understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.